that's an idea. Now that's an idea. Now that's an idea. Now that's an idea.
So kia ora and welcome to the show. We've got a very special episode speaking with Paul and Panapa from Rua Bioscience. How are we?
Fine. Good. Yeah, good. Good.
So obviously we're having a corridor today because you got some big things coming up with a share raise going on. But I thought just before we kind of jump into it, we could just have a bit of a chat about the company itself, what's going on in the market, how you guys actually got involved. Because obviously I've got a bit of a background, but everyone's got busy lives and kind of might forget the journey you guys have been on, which is a bit winding and going all over the place and changing it up. Yeah, maybe Panapa, do you want to start? Just how did Rua Bioscience come around and the different iterations it's been through, and maybe a bit about yourself as well, if you want to share.
Yeah, well, kia ora, tēnā tātou. Ko hake rangi tumaunga, ko waia pui te awa, ko Ngāti ue poa tu Ngāti Pro ngā iwi. I hail from Ruatoria, brought up there, spent some time away doing some bits and pieces, and went home to about 15 years ago to have my kids, so that they knew where their tūranga waiwai was, where they knew where they would be from. And went home wanting to contribute back to the community. And one of the things that we got into, or one of the pathways that I stepped into, was around sustainable economic development. Like many rural towns, there was the urban drift, decades ago, and many of those towns have struggled, and Ruatoria hasn't been too different to that. So going back home, wanted to be part of, like, how do we set it up? How do we do things better for the next generations and pass on the rākau that we were given with just a little bit more of improvement. And at the time, there was a local hapu that they'd done a whole lot of work around cultural capability and environmental capability, but there was the identification that something needs to be done around income for economic development. So there was a hui that was held. A whole lot of people came. The second hui, less people came. And by the third hui, there was only 5 people left. And so we thought, right, we're going to do something. And it was actually more around looking about how we could use our local natural resources to be able to create income streams so that we could diversify away from high volume, low value sources of income stream that weren't good for the environment, like forestry, which is, there's been lots of publicity about that over the last handfuls of years, farming, etc. And rather than sending away primary products like send away a log or send away a cow, how can we get multiple steps of that value chain so that we could entice people to come back home? We could raise the medium annual household income, because if you've got a higher household income, you generally have a better life. But also allow people to come back home, because most people left rural places to be able to chase higher incomes. So with the cost of living, which isn't just been high now, it's been high for a while, how could people come back home? And they really wanted to have jobs and houses. So it was really around how we do economic development. And so that's how we started. We threw a whole lot of stuff against the wall, a whole lot of mud against the wall, and a few different things stuck. Now, most of those were around how we can use our natural resources. So native species of different things, whether it was native trees or seafood or fungi, and we did a whole lot of investigation. Now, some people might be saying, well, cannabis isn't native to Aotearoa or to Tairāwhiti, and that's right. But what we do have is we have decades and generations of expertise. So a lot of our whānau have been growing for decades and generations, and hold a lot of some of the most amazing mātauranga or knowledge in this industry throughout the country, and there's other hotspots of that. And so actually we've got people that are already very knowledgeable, they've got expertise. How can we use that as a pathway to increase our well-being? And the reality was that it was going to happen anyway, because that was coming, that wave, or they call it the green wave, was coming. And if we didn't take advantage of it, then we would essentially be pushed out of the market. And it's been our people, and all across the globe, it's Indigenous peoples that have suffered the most through the justice systems. If you're Indigenous in any country, you're 4 times more likely to go to jail or have charges raised against you. So we've already been suffering. So how can we change that trajectory, create incomes, and have less negative impacts on our whānau? So that's why we went down it. And no one had done it at that stage in the country. It wasn't legal. There was no framework. There was no regulations, no laws. But we could see it happening globally. So we were like, right, we're going to jump in here. We did our first crop, which could only be hemp at that time. You could only do hemp, which means that it had to have below 0.3% THC. You can get a license for that. So we did that for 3 months, because cannabis only takes 3 months to grow. And then we did the deeper dive into the industry. And there was 3 avenues for potential making money out of it. There was fiber for clothes or rope or building. There was food, and then there was medicinal. Medicinal hadn't come online in New Zealand, but when we did the research, that was where the greatest opportunity was. So that's where we went to. And then there's been a whole raft of investments along the way. We had some, I guess, angel investors that chucked a few pennies in to start, or a few dollars in to start. And then we had a crowd fundraise where we gave the first opportunity to local people. Because our thought was, if it's going to be successful, generally it's the investors that get in first that have the greatest returns. So we wanted to offer that to our own people. And then we brought in institutional investors. And then following that, a few years later, we listed on the New Zealand Stock Exchange to be the first Māori-founded company to be on the stock exchange. So there's been a whole lot of, I guess, steps along the way. And to be fair, when we started, we thought it was going to be a whole lot quicker than it has been. The industry this hasn't just been felt by us, but across the whole industry, is that it's been a lot slower than anyone anticipated. But we've been able to stay the course, and we've now got to a position where we've laid all the foundations, we've laid the pipelines, and the last quarter we've had the most sales that we've ever had. We've had record sales, and so the trajectory is going up like that. So we're not far away from being financially self-sustainable, which is where any company wants to be. So it's been a huge journey right from the beginning of how do we increase our people's well-being, from that dream through to cannabis as one of those vehicles, and now we're right on the brink of that.
It's funny. Just makes me think of any time I've done like house renos. Like if you actually knew how much work it's actually going to be, you'd like never start. 'Cause you're like, oh, this will take a couple months, and then we'll just like knock it out of the park. And then you're like, oh no, what's behind this wall? Oh no, they just changed legislation. So I can imagine that kind of like journey you've been on has been trying at times. What about you, Paul? How did you get involved in the company, and what's your background?
Thanks, Jack. Well, how did I get involved in the company? It was pretty much Panapa and Manu when they raised their first tranche of money from the people on the coast and private investors. They had a bit of money, and they were just sitting there saying, starting up this medicinal cannabis company, and they sort of said, "Hey, Paul, can you come and help?" And I knew nothing about the cannabis industry, pretty much like all of us at the time. We didn't know much, but I said, yeah, that sounds like fun. So I started working with them part-time, became full-time, became to where it is now. So I've been with them right from the early days of the company. I wasn't there at the beginning of the hemp course, but yeah, got involved very early on. So I've been there sort of like nigh on 6, maybe 7-ish years now. And yeah, helped set up the business as it is. I come from a non-industry background. I've got business with Fletcher Challenge companies and private companies and a few different things, and I did a bit of consulting. So many and varied, but by far and away, this has been the best job I've ever had, without a doubt. And the main reason is because I sort of have a belief in the purpose of the company. The company brings health and wealth back to the people of Ruatoria and the people on the East Coast, which resonates very strongly with my own values. I do believe like business is a sort of a force for good, and when you do have a business that, employs people and, you're bringing in funds and you're sort of like, doing the mahi, it actually provides, purpose for lots of people, puts food on the table as well as sort of like a reason to get up out of bed. So, it just resonated with me, and I love the company. And of course, cannabis is cool. My kids now think I'm a lot cooler than I was. And so, working for a cannabis company has a certain sort of cachet about it. So yeah, it's been a fun ride, and we're still going. And as Panapa alluded to, we're sort of on the cusp of sort of a sustainable company with cash flow positive. So, setting up, doing a renovation is one thing. Setting up a business is exactly like that. You sort of think it's going to be X, Y, Z. You do a business plan, but, it takes longer. It's harder. Like starting a business is hard. Starting a business in the medicinal cannabis industry is really hard. So it's been a hell of a journey. With the team around me, we've all learned a heap. And we've had to learn a lot, and boy, we have learned a lot over the number of years. So yeah, that's how I come to be where I am today, and definitely still enjoying the ride on the way up.
Yeah, it's as important. I think you've got a solid foundation of the fact that like it's the company's born from wanting to make jobs and income for people, because I think at that foundation level it means that you need to make money. So you're not just a social enterprise trying to help people out, but like the kind of foundation is to create income and wealth. And so you're driven to do the company well as well, which I don't know, this is why I was kind of so impressed by the company's pivot from being, like a grower to this kind of capital light model where you're, I don't know, essentially kind of almost like a Zespri of New Zealand cannabis or something like that, because it does seem like it's a way to really capitalize. But I think from like a local perspective, it might not be something that's like super understood well, where people might have thought, "Oh, this is not what we kind of signed up to." But I don't know who wants to take this up, but how did that change come about?
Yeah, I can jump on that, and Paul can probably
Yep, go for it.
pull me into line if I go a little bit off piece. And it was really pragmatic, really. Like at the beginning, every company that came into the cannabis space had to do everything. You had to be vertically integrated, because there was no one existing in the market. You couldn't go to someone and be like, you didn't just have growers. You had to be able to do regulatory stuff. You had to be able to do marketing. You had to be able to do manufacturing, because there was nobody that could do it at the time. Remember when we started, we were one of the first, and the first in many instances. So you couldn't just outsource parts to different pieces. But that's really expensive. To be fully vertically integrated is really expensive, and especially when there's been such a long time for anyone in the industry to make profits. And so we pivoted, and we really, when we started at the outset, it was really around creating knowledge that could be passed down intergenerationally. And so it's around how do you develop and how do you leverage the development of knowledge. And so when we look at the skills that we have, we have some amazing growers. The reality is that it's really expensive to grow in New Zealand. And especially when you're out on a cusp, it's even more expensive. We've got a growing facility in Rua just to be able to do things like get tradespeople to come in and attend to something that might go wrong. That's a 2.5 hour drive from Gisborne to be able to come and fix the plumbing or fix the engineer, or if you need something like that, it's an expense in itself. So it's just a cost of doing business. So we looked at, well, what are our skills? And we've got amazing growers who are very well connected through the illicit growing space. They've been growing for years, they know. And so through those relationships, because of the kaupapa, we've been able to build the trust to be able to access genetics. Now, we're one of the few countries in the world where genetics can come from the illicit or the legacy market and come into the legal framework in an open manner. Everywhere else in the world, it's very closed. So that's a competitive advantage and opportunity that we've got. So we've got the skills, the knowledge, the connections, and the frameworks to be able to do that. So it made sense to do that. So that's at one end. At the other end of the spectrum is getting the things to market. Like, it's all good to be able to grow it, and heaps of people got into the industry because it's very sexy to grow cannabis. It's and the saying goes, it's easy to grow weed. It's really hard to grow good weed. So the ability to be able to do that. Everyone got in, everyone grew it, but there was nowhere for it to go because you've got to have the pipelines to be able to sell it into market. We put a whole lot of time and effort, and Paul can talk about the pipelines to open up international markets or pathways into markets, because that's where New Zealand is just not big enough. And in many industries, New Zealand is not big enough. And it's not that easy to get a narcotic or an illicit drug across boundaries internationally. So we've really had to forge that pathway to be able to do that. And that's where a lot of our expertise sits. We've got multiple jurisdictions all around the globe. So those two are two defendable spaces where we could see profit opportunities and knowledge development opportunities. So that's where we sit.
Yeah. Paul, do you want to just talk about how, like the kind of current state of the company and sales and that pipeline we've got at the moment? Because I imagine how many countries are in, like you
5.
all over Europe. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you want to just
Yeah,
chat
well,
about that? Because that's
not
fascinating
the
stuff.
US, but yeah. So
Not the US.
yeah, not the US. No, I mean, cannabis is quite curious. Everyone sort of thinks, oh, cannabis, US that's the place to be. US is the largest medicinal and adult use cannabis market in the world, bar none. Massive, like, almost 10 times bigger than its nearest country, Canada. But it's only legal at a state level in the US. At the Donald Trump level, it's illegal and federally illegal. So that means from a government to government or country to country, you can't trade with the US. You can't trade with the states, and you can't trade with the US in total. So it's a very curious and interesting setup. So the states are sort of something we'll watch, but you can't do anything with. So from our perspective, and from an early stage, a number of years ago, like Panapa sort of said, we needed to acknowledge that New Zealand is small, and we need to develop skills about moving a controlled drug around the world. Moving a controlled drug around the world has its own unique nuances about import permits, export permits, licenses, this, that, and the other, like lots of regulation to move drugs around the world. So it takes time to sort of set up these, we call them pipelines, but pathways to market. And so we have a pathway to market in 5 countries, Germany, UK, Australia, Czech Republic, most recently, and New Zealand, of course, in our home market. But New Zealand's obviously very small, population 5 million. You compare that with Germany, population 80 million. The markets are just substantially bigger. And so those markets provide us the market base and the revenue base to be able to sort of create this sustainable company. So we've been planning the company to be self-sustaining for all the reasons Panapa spoke about. And in the process of planning, your logic just like immediately moves you towards, we need to play in export markets or large markets outside of New Zealand. So that's when we've been spending a lot of time working on those markets. And so at the moment, as we speak, we've got 5 markets with 5 different revenue streams. And the biggest ones are Germany, Australia, and New Zealand. UK and Czech Republic are smaller, but they've got a lot of growth potential, and they are growing quite strongly as individual markets. So we're sort of there in those smaller markets at an early stage, and we sort of hope to grow into those over the next period of time. It was last year, FY, financial year for us, 2025, so the 12 months to June. Was kind of the first year of significant sales for us and meaningful sales. And that was like 6 years into the journey. So we thought it would be a lot quicker. It wasn't. But last year we got there into the key markets, and this year we're building on that. So these pipelines to us are sort of critical, because unless you get patient and prescriber demand, you make no money. So, and to get to that point, it's taken obviously a lot of work to get to that point, but now we have the ability to get revenue out of each of those markets. So that's positive. So our now focus is increasing those revenues in those key markets.
So what kind of numbers are we talking for, like, in total?
Yeah. So in total, in the previous 12 months, we did 1.9 million in revenue. This current 12 months, we'd expect to get somewhere between 3 and 5 million, it looks like. And after that, bigger again, but I'm not going to say any numbers. So it's just going to be bigger is the plan. We need it to be bigger to get to that sort of break-even level. So, yeah.
That's a fairly nice jump up over that 12 months.
Well, the previous 12 months, it went from 0 to 1.9. So that was an infinity
That's
percent
not bad.
increase. So, the increases the increases can be quite sizable because the markets are massive. And around the world, every medicinal cannabis market around the world, the stats and the data are showing that legal medicinal cannabis is doing nothing but grow in each of the markets. And what's happening at sort of like a global scale is that cannabis has been an illicit drug for nigh on 70 years in most countries of the world. And it's only in the last decade that things are really starting to open up. Obviously, the most famous we hear about is US and Canada, but, Germany, Australia opened up 2016. That's 9 years ago, the legal medicinal cannabis scheme. So in the last decade, there's something like 1.4 billion people on the planet live in countries with access to legal cannabis of some form. And you're starting to get this sense from prescribers and doctors that, this is a legitimate medicine. This isn't just a sort of a just say no to drug situation. This is a medicine that can be a tool in the kitty to basically utilize for health and wealth. And it's also, with that comes the breaking down of the associated stigma to do with cannabis. And you can see that start to erode through lots of surveys done in Australia in particular. Year on year, the society's like acceptance that cannabis should be part of some sort of a legal framework has done nothing but increase. Society's perceptions of it change as we live in a system where cannabis is regulated and medicinal. So around the world, in almost every market, in every market we operate in, the graphs do nothing but go up. Legal medicinal cannabis is growing. So we're operating in a business that is selling into a growing pie. So even if we maintain market share, we should grow.
Yeah, okay.
So,
I mean, it's
from an investment point of view, this is a really interesting space to be in.
yeah. Well, and it's like you say, like, I don't know, 10, 20 years ago, it was the kind of drug was still a scary thing, marijuana. And then now it's kind of like, even in New Zealand, it's kind of legal. And I think everyone's just realized that, nothing's changed. So, the kind of fear, like natural fears that you'd have of change, you go, actually, everyone's still going to work, doing their things.
Sky
Maybe
has not
we
fallen.
were a bit, yeah.
Definitely not.
So, well, I think now we can tie into this share raise you're doing, but linking with that, what's the share raise about, and the kind of the future of Rua and the goals, hopes, dreams. I don't know, the kind of moonshot ideas, and then like maybe just like the probable reality of just the day to day.
Well, the moonshot idea is to basically have a company that improves the health and wealth of people on the East Coast. Cannabis is our first foray into that, and like the founders wanted this to be an intergenerational company, and cannabis is the first tool in the toolbox that we're using for that. So the moonshot idea is to be around in 100 years' time, still providing health and wealth to the people on the East Coast. Whether cannabis is the only tool in our toolbox or whether we expand, who knows what in the future. And I'll let Panapa come in on that later, but about the moonshot. But how that links back to this right now is that, the capital raise is about, we do need funds. Primarily the funds will be used for working capital or purchasing inventory of the products. Basically, we need $1 million to make $2 million worth of sales. So to get our sales up, we need a sort of a bigger and bigger pie of working capital to fund the inventory. So that's the essence of this cap raise. And we're sort of saying, look, our sales are going up, but we do need more capital to keep our sales going up. And that's the essence of it.
Yeah, and so Panapa, what's the future goals from that health and wealth viewpoint?
Well, if we think intergenerationally, like when this industry started, we were kind of pitched against as like some bros from the bush, and we were pitched against like successful businessmen that were like, and the reality is that we really want to prove to our own people and to others that you can do something like this. Like if you can dream it, you can do it. Because there's been a whole lot of intergenerational trauma, because we're a 95% Māori population in the Tairāwhiti, well, 50% in Tairāwhiti, but 95% where Rua is. So that we've already had a half generation of tamariki and rangatahi come up and grow up and see that it's possible for that you can create $100 million. Like when we did our capital raise, the company was valued at $100 million. So you can do that from Rua. And when you look at development of young people, a lot of the opportunities they have is what they see. And so we've already, like, if we're able to show that, we've already succeeded in that. That's one success we're able to tick off, is that you can create something like this in and out of Rua. And so that's not just for Rua, although we're biased towards that. Well, I am, because that's where I come from. And we're looking at intergenerational healing and well-being. So that's one, but also the ability, as part of what we do, and we're the only company in the industry, is that we put a whole lot of funds and scholarships back into our community to support our rangatahi that are going off into beyond school, into training opportunities. And it doesn't have to be around cannabis. It's just opening up their eyes into what the opportunity is, because it might not be cannabis that is the big shot thing that helps people to come home. But if we have multiple people bringing their skills back home because they were born back home and they love being where they come from intergenerationally, like up through their whakapapa, then they know that they can come home. So we've been really big into that. And then the other one is that because of the framework in which legal cannabis is it's still really expensive. It's not subsidized by the government, etc. So we currently do we support over 30 patients that we pay for with some funding partners, we pay for their medicine. Because the reality is we live in a low socioeconomic region, and so people can't afford it. And so intergenerationally, like, we want to be able to support all our people with the rongoa that they need, and cannabis is a medicine, but also aspirations of being able to inspire the next generations to be able to look beyond horizons that surround them. And whether it's in cannabis, whether it's in medicines, whether it's in whatever it is, that we can then create platforms for the future generations to increase well-being. So, the cannabis was just one of the ideas that was thrown against the wall. There's a few others, and entities have been set up with those. And like Paul said, no company lives forever. No business lives forever. There's always a sunrise and there's always a sunset. So in 50 years or 100 years or 150 years or 200 years, the landscape of what's needed for our people might be completely different. But if we have the confidence and the knowing that we can do whatever we need, then if we're part of that journey, then we'll be successful. And to date, we've been able to do that.
And so how much are you guys wanting to raise? And so is it just like current investors that can get involved, or is it going to start with current investors and then go out to the wider public?
Yeah, so this current raise, we're seeking to raise $2 million, and that's from existing shareholders. So if you're a shareholder in the company, we're saying if for every 3 shares that you own, you've got the ability to buy 1 new share for 2.5 cents a share. And so that, if everyone picks up on that, will raise us $2 million. We have the ability for what they call shortfall, for people who aren't currently shareholders but would like to apply for what's that shortfall, which is for shares that aren't allocated or aren't taken up by existing shareholders. There's the ability to have that applied for by new shareholders. But this is really about existing shareholders. We're asking existing shareholders to sort of help us out, and we're seeking to raise $2 million.
And so the price of the share has like kind of fallen over time, and have kind of like settled at this roughly, I know, 25 cents or something like that. So if someone's a bit kind of unsure about putting more money in, what would be your pitch to them about the kind of future of the company and why they would want to dive in more?
Well, I'm not going to provide financial advice to anyone, and they can choose to invest or not invest. That's up to everyone. Everyone's got their own personal situation. But the directors of the company and the management of the company, we're confidently looking at the future, sort of saying we know our revenue can increase and will increase. The fundamentals, as I said, all the markets we play in are all growing. We have 5 pipelines into those markets, and a lot of what's holding us back at the moment is the ability to get working capital to fund inventory to be able to make the sales at the level we need. So we're confident, but we can't make guarantees. We can't do any of that. So yeah, in terms of investment, we would just sort of say from the landscape and the forecast we're looking forward, yeah, we think our revenue is going to increase and we're playing in markets that are growing. So we think the fundamentals are good. But yeah, it's no question about it. We do need cash, and if we don't get cash, we won't be able to invest in that inventory and grow the sales. That's just the simple fact. If shareholders don't support, then we've got bigger questions to ask ourselves, and we'd have to go back to the drawing board and say, what do we do?
Yeah, that's business.
That's business.
That's business.
I think if I just add in on to that, like as a founder, like I've been there right from the start, and I'm still a director. This has been kind of the most prosperous that the company has ever looked, because we've got certainty of being able to make sales. We literally need the funds to be able to have the stock to be able to sell. In past years, it was still about figuring it out. So we've done all the figuring out. We sit up here as far as companies in New Zealand about figuring out how to make money out of the industry. And so now we've been able to not just talk about it, but prove it. And so, being able to say, well, this is how much our profits have increased month by month over the last 18 months. And as Paul said, the market's growing, all that kind of stuff. Like, it's the most, as a director, it's the most comfortable that we've been since we've created the company. And I'm a person who's comfortable being uncomfortable, but that's and again, it isn't a promise of, because business, you can't make promises. But from what I've seen in the industry, and I've been intimately involved since the outset, like it's definitely we've got almost all the way where we need to be.
Yeah, I mean, maybe at the start when you're asking people to invest, it was very much like, hey, we've got an idea. Do you want to like fund this like idea that we don't know how we're going to do it and we're just going to figure it out? And there was a lot of love. And now it's like, hey, we're making the money, like, invest in a business that's actually got revenue. So yeah. Totally different pitch from now.
And one of the things that, like I sort of said, all the markets we're in, they're all growing. Another aspect that could give some people confidence is that because we're in 5 markets, what we're finding is that sales and markets sort of fluctuate, but because we've got a breadth of markets, particularly the 3 big ones for us, New Zealand, Australia, and Germany, like you might have one bad month in one market, but the other 2s carry it forward. So a relatively consistent revenue. If we're only in one market, then you've got some more volatility, but we have actually less volatility than you might expect. So that gives some investors some confidence.
And then the other question I had about was, obviously you're in the business of medical marijuana, but is there a space in the company for recreational use? And I know you've got a petition going on at the moment, so we could tie that in. I don't know who wants to talk about that.
Yeah, maybe I can take the first part and Paul can take the second. The reality is that it's a cannabis market. And then there's 2, it's that cannabis market, and you can either, up until very recently, you've only been able to buy it illegally. And so that market is never going to disappear. It's always going to be there. And so what we're seeing is an uptake of a legal framework has been put into place, and now there's a pathway over time. And in most jurisdictions around the world, like the States and Canada, you see that it goes from being illegal to a kind of illegal restricted, or more restricted, like what we're in, like you have to go through a prescriber, to a more open place where it's kind of adult use, or like it is in Canada and the States. So it's really an inevitability of time, and it's really around social acceptance. And we're already seeing that it'll go into a adult use space, and it'll probably go through decriminalisation first and then into adult use. Now, how long that piece of string is, we've got ideas, because we live and breathe these markets, and we watch them, but it'll be a matter of time before that goes. Now, a lot of the knowledge that we've developed and that we have will be able to have benefit into those markets. Now, we can't make a call on what it's going to be like when that happens and what our reaction will be to it. But what we do have is a whole lot of knowledge and path and understanding that will benefit the end consumer. So we're very much consumer focused. Like at the end of the day, medical cannabis is about providing relief and pathways for people in need. And so that being one of our cores of why we're doing this, that there will be opportunities that present themselves, and we'll be able to make the decisions, or the governance and the management will be able to make those decisions when they come up. But for example, we're focusing in our cultivation space on genetics. So we'll have one of the largest genetics libraries that focus on the genetics library in the country. And so that's only going to benefit users going forward into the future, whatever the pathway is for cannabis to be consumed or purchased.
Yeah. I mean, who
Yeah,
knows?
Paul, on that
Yeah.
petition, because I think what you were talking about, Panapa, with it's like this natural pathway of going like illegal, kind of medical, decriminalized, and then legal. Where we tried to go, I think in that referendum that happened, and we kind of went from illegal straight to full, legalized whole market, and it kind of just, I think it freaked too many people out. Where if it went on that natural pathway, you can kind of like ease people into it. So yeah, do you want to talk about that petition you're doing?
Well, couldn't agree more. Like, I mean, basically, you got to bring society along on a journey, and it's more than just a few weeks and months; it's years. So, yeah, I mean, we've seen it around in Germany. Like they're legal, and now they have last year they've gone to legal medicinal. Sorry, Germany's gone from legal medicinal to decriminalized home cultivation and personal use. And who knows what the future will hold? Will they stop there? Will they progress? I don't know. But I mean, that's sort of a mental model you might sort of expect could happen in New Zealand. Who knows what politicians are going to do? But from a personal point of view, we put out the ability online for people to be able to email their members of parliament to advocate for decriminalisation of personal consumption and personal cultivation of a small number of plants, which is actually the same viewpoint that the New Zealand Drug Foundation came to when they talked about their medicinal cannabis framework that they would put in place, or the cannabis framework that they would put in place. They sort of advocated for decriminalisation of cultivation of a small number of plants. The reason we did it was we're not sort of sitting there advocating that this is going to be great for the domestic market, or that there's any sort of like intense reason that we're going to get a return on capital. We want to play in that market. The reality is I think from the community that we grew up in, we know a number of people with stories, which basically criminalisation for a small number of plants and small personal use is just not a great use of the justice system's time and energy. And it's also, it just does not feel fair on good people who day to day might grow a cannabis plant or personally consume. They're not bad people. They're not bad citizens. They're good citizens. And so sometimes those laws are used in ways that you just think this just isn't fair. And I think we're just sort of saying, as a society in New Zealand, Aotearoa New Zealand, we think this makes sense for where we're at right now. So here's a tool, go tell your MP about it and make them sit up and take notice, make them think about it, because if they don't think about it and if they don't think that people care about it, they'll do nothing about it. So it's our small nod to trying to actually push along the conversation in a reasonable way.
Yeah, I mean, gosh, well, I don't think I know anyone who actually thinks that like marijuana is this like super bad thing anymore. Like even my dear mother, who's socially conservative. Well, no, what is she? She doesn't think that like people getting high on like a weekend for medicinal or recreational purposes, even though she's not into it, she would never like think people should go to jail for this shit because it's it's bonkers. Like we're in 2025.
Yeah. I think Aotearoa, we can be a bit mature about it now. If we're able to have mature conversations about alcohol in our community, then heck, you'd think cannabis should be acceptable. So yeah, I appreciate that there's a lot of stigma, a lot of opinions, but like honestly, as Panapa said, we've lived and breathed in the years now in the legal framework, and we've got people in our team who've lived and breathed cannabis market for decades. And, you know, we're sitting there sort of having gone deep on it. We think this is eminently sensible. Yeah. Eminently sensible for the community.
And just thinking about your company, I've just got a house in Gizzy, and my neighbor was just rocked over. I didn't have a bloody wheelbarrow, and I was doing all this gardening, and he's like, "Oh, bro, use my wheelbarrow." Like, "Oh, what are you up to? What do you do for work?" He's like, "Oh, I got to go back up the coast and do some work." I was like, "Oh, what do you do?" He's like, "Oh, Rua Bioscience. I'm one of the growers up there." I was like, "Oh, sweet." He's like, "Yeah, I used to be like, just growing weed illegally and doing all this." And now he's like paying taxes, just like going to work like a normal person. So this is the future we want. Like just people be able to go to work and just like, do their thing.
Cool. Yeah, well, now I know where
I
you
think, I
live.
think, I think, yeah, I think it's one of those things. Like when we look at it, like so many people don't grow it to like buy holiday houses and buy the latest flashiest car. It's just to like in the past it's been just to put like shoes on the kids' feet, buy lunches, pay school fees, etc. And if you look at it, the old adage, give five people alcohol and they're likely to start a fight. Give 5 people marijuana and they're likely to start a band. Just the health statistics alone from accident and emergency about how much resource goes into alcohol related incidents is at first line medical response is phenomenal. And so if that can be accepted within our society, like something that has the opposite effect to that, it's just a no-brainer. And it's just a matter of time. Since and Paul talked about the education that's happened. Just in the handful of years that it's been legalized, we're starting to see a vast majority, or a greater increasing majority of conservative New Zealand see the benefit of it, because it's usually later in life that people will turn to it, where you have things like opioids and all the pills that they're given, the blue pill, the yellow pill, and that's got to be taken because the white pill and the green pill is doing this, and the side effects of the purple and the orange pill, etc. And they're seeing the benefits for like end of life or later in life. And it's natural. It's not done by some pharmaceutical company that's just doing pure profits. And that's really where we've gone and set. But we are vast. We're very different from almost every other cannabis company in the industry, because we're not just profit focused. We have to be profitable to remain and be successful here. But our underlying reason for being, our co-copper, that's not something you can't greenwash that kind of stuff. You can't just go tick a box and be like, "Oh, we've planted some trees, we're good for the world." Like from within our hearts, that's why our people come to work every day. That's why we do everything that we do. That's why all the support that we've had has been there. It's because it's truly something that's grounded in well-being, not just for the company, but for the society, the environment, for the whole. Yeah. So that makes us completely different. And I think over time, more and more people will get used to that. That's where cannabis comes from. Cannabis is that type of plant.
Kia ora. Well, I think we've just nailed it. So I'll be sure to include all the links and stuff to the capital raise and the petition. And thanks so much for being on the show.
No worries. Just a small thing, like marijuana is apparently a word that, well, I remember when I started early on, I used to call it marijuana too. Apparently marijuana is not the word you should be using. Cannabis is the word you should be using, apparently. Marijuana was a demonized word that came from North America in the early 1900s, I believe. It was like, I think it came out, I could get this wrong, but it was a word used racially charged word against Mexicans. I think it was like the Mexicans used to call it marijuana. It was their sort of like native tongue, but the Americans called it the evil marijuana and sort of like picked up on it. Yeah. So we try not to use it, apparently.
Okay, cannabis it is. Cannabis it is. We'll let the people know.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Hey,
thanks, guys.
Thanks, Jack. Yeah.
Thank you, Jack.
Thanks, dude.
Now that's an idea.